Good evening. This video is going to be about Chapter 6 of the Daniel Dreisbach's book, Reading the Bible with the Founding Fathers. Chapter 6 specifically is titled The Defense of Liberty Against Tyrants, the Bible, the Right of Resistance in the American Revolution. And his focus is on tracing the pathway that the founders, the colonists, and the colonial leaders of revolutionary times, where they picked up their resistance theology. This was a Protestant tradition that dates back to the Reformation of Martin Luther's time. Luther and John Calvin were prominent in the rise of resistance theology or biblical disobedience. They believed that the Christian had the duty to resist in the event that they were being asked to do something that was against the Bible. According to Acts 5:29, we must obey God rather than man. Peter telling that in front of the Sanhedrin. So Dreisbach traces the pathway, as I said. So we go through the revolution, the 15th, 16th century into the 17th century. Things become more violent. Things become more urgent. And as time goes on, the resistance becomes less of a biblical resistance and more of a secular resistance. When you get to the period of time where after let me make sure I say this word correctly, if I can find it. In 1579, there was a work called the Vindiciae, I hope I said that right, Vindiciae, and it was written under a pseudonym of Stephanus Junius Brutus. There were two possible. It was determined that the writer of this work was either one of two Frenchmen or both together, and this had a direct link to the colonists in America, because this was at this point when this was written that it was put into circulation. It was published in 1579, and it was standard reading for colonists. John Adams called it one of the most important books in the revolutionary ideals. And this book was prominent in both secular and religious communities. John Locke, it is said, drew a lot of his inspiration from this work, and so Locke was more of a secular theorist than a religious theorist, and so this is where the ideals become more secular in nature, and the Bible becomes less important as the time goes by. Locke's social contract had less of an emphasis on God and more on the contract between leaders and their people. There's also you can also find some discussion of this in other works. For example, Jonathan Mayhew, a prominent minister of the early or the mid 18th century, he delivered a sermon called The Discourse Concerning Unlimited Submission and Non-Resistance to the Higher Powers. So he's talking mainly about, should there be unlimited submission? Should there, at what point would resistance become necessary? And so, along with Dreisbach's analysis, Mayhew's sermon was not along with Dreisbach's. I keep putting Dreisbach into, I'm trying to put him into a 18th century context, and he's a modern author. He's writing about this. Mayhew's sermon was read by a lot of the colonial leaders. So the chapter concludes. The chapter as a whole, right, in tracing the line of how resistance to tyranny evolved from Reformation time to colonial time. The Bible served as a key resource, even after it became after certain theorists put a more secular spin on resistance. The Bible also always kept its place as a centerpiece of resistance, because ultimately the founders viewed it from a religious perspective. So we become, I found myself getting a lot of understanding thanks to Dreisbach's analysis and his knowledge of the history of the time period, that we see a lot more of the religious and moral dimensions that existed at that time. So I hope that my analysis was sufficient for everyone.